When Keanu Reeves steps onto the set of Voices in Debate, the audience readies itself for another deep and thoughtful conversation. But James Holloway isn't here for thoughtful, he's here for confrontation. Known for his sharp, cutting style, Holloway has built a reputation on breaking his guests down with relentless provocations. And tonight, he sees Keanu's silver cross necklace as an opportunity, not just an accessory, but a symbol to dissect, a belief to challenge. Yet, as Keanu settles into his chair, something shifts. The balance of power, which should feel automatic, doesn't. Holloway leans in, poised to strike, confident in his ability to control the conversation. What he doesn't realize, however, is that by the end of this interview, it won't be Keanu struggling for words, it will be him. And the world will be watching. The studio buzzed with anticipation. Bright stage lights cast a sleek, modern glow, illuminating LED panels that pulsed in hues of blue and gold, colors that reflected the sophisticated brand of the show. The audience murmured, a mix of excitement and curiosity filling the space. Voices in Debate wasn't just any talk show, it was an arena. A place where reputations were tested, where words were weapons. And its host. A man who thrived on intellectual combat. At the center of the stage, James Holloway adjusted his tie, his movements smooth, deliberate. Tall, with precisely styled silver hair and sharp, calculating eyes, he was a master of controlled aggression. His specialty was pushing people past their limits, forcing them into raw, uncomfortable honesty. Some called it brilliant. Others called it ruthless. Either way, it made for compelling television. The show's theme music surged through the speakers, and the audience erupted into applause. As the camera zoomed in, Holloway spread his arms wide in a practiced, theatrical gesture. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Voices in Debate," he declared, his voice rich with confidence, effortlessly commanding the room. "The show where we unravel truths, challenge narratives, and put great minds to the test." The audience responded with enthusiasm, cheers echoing through the studio. Each week, Voices in Debate invited powerful figures, politicians, intellectuals, and celebrities, and forced them into conversations that often made headlines by morning. But tonight's guest was different. He wasn't a controversial policymaker or a scandal-plagued star. He was an icon. A man beloved for his humility, respected for his humanity, yet surrounded by an air of mystery. Holloway let the suspense build before delivering the introduction. Our guest tonight is one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. A legendary actor, admired not just for his talent, but for the way he carries himself, always kind, always discreet, never caught in the web of scandal. But surely, there's more beneath the surface. And tonight, we intend to find out. The audience roared in approval, some rising to their feet in admiration. The camera shifted, focusing on the side of the stage as the curtain slowly drew back. And then, he appeared. Keanu Reeves walked out with that signature composed stride, his presence effortlessly commanding without needing to demand it. Dressed in a sleek black suit, his tie absent, his long hair framing his face just so. The studio lights caught the glint of the silver cross necklace resting against his chest, a small, yet striking detail. He acknowledged the audience with a reserved smile before taking his seat across from Holloway. His posture was relaxed, legs crossed casually, exuding a quiet confidence that made it clear, he wasn't intimidated. "Keanu Reeves," Holloway said, leaning in slightly, his gaze sharp and assessing. "It's a pleasure to have you here." Keanu nodded, his voice steady, calm. "Pleasure's mine, James." Holloway studied him for a beat, like a chess player weighing his first move. Then, with a measured smirk, he began. "You have a reputation," he mused. "One of the nicest guys in Hollywood. A bit of an enigma, wouldn't you say?" Always kind. Always humble. Always private. But honestly, Keanu, I think there's a lot more to you than people realize. Keanu tilted his head slightly, offering a small, knowing smile. I think we all have more layers than we show the world. No doubt, Holloway agreed, narrowing his eyes. And that's exactly what we're here to explore. A pause. Just long enough to be deliberate. Then, Holloway's eyes flicked subtly to the silver cross resting against Keanu's chest. He gestured toward it with the air of someone setting a trap. You've never been particularly outspoken about religion or faith, he said smoothly. But here you are, wearing a very visible Christian symbol. Keanu remained still, his expression unreadable, though his fingers instinctively brushed against the cross, a movement so small it might have gone unnoticed. The studio lights shifted as the show returned from commercial break. The murmurs of the audience softened, replaced by a charged silence. Behind them, the Voices in Debate logo glowed against the sleek backdrop. James Holloway settled back into his chair, a smug smile curling at the corner of his lips. This was his moment. His favorite part of every interview. The moment he stripped his guests down, peeled away their defenses, forced them into uncomfortable corners where they had nowhere to hide. He twirled a pen between his fingers, his manner almost dismissive, before locking eyes with Keanu, predator to prey. All right, we're back, he announced. Before the break, I asked you a simple question, Keanu. He leaned forward slightly, his tone dripping with feigned curiosity. What does that necklace mean to you? The audience stilled, some leaning forward in their seats, eager for his response. Keanu's fingers brushed against the silver cross, rolling it gently between them. His face remained calm, unreadable. This necklace, he glanced down at it, as if weighing his words carefully. It has personal meaning to me. Holloway arched a brow. Then, he let out a small, scoffing laugh. Personal, he repeated, his voice laced with mockery. Oh, come on, Keanu. You're a public figure. Everything you wear, everything you display, it sends a message. Keanu didn't react, his expression as composed as ever. But Holloway could sense something simmering beneath the surface. A tension. A restraint. Leaning in slightly, Holloway pressed on, his tone dripping with condescension. And let's be real here, he gestured to the cross. It's 2025. The world has changed. People have changed. And yet here you are. Holloway's gaze flicked to the silver cross hanging from Keanu's neck, his finger pointing at it like an accusation. His tone dripped with challenge. An outdated symbol in a modern world, he continued, his smirk widening, deliberately pressing the provocation further. The tension in the room thickened. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the sharp edge in his words. But Keanu? He didn't flinch. His eyes remained locked on Holloway, unwavering. Outdated, he finally said, his voice calm but firm. Holloway leaned back, feigning amusement. Yes, outdated. Religion, faith, belief in unseen forces, he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. I'm not a religious man, Keanu. I believe in reason, in progress. And honestly, I find it surprising that someone like you, someone modern, intelligent, forward-thinking, would still hold on to something so ancient. A soft chuckle escaped him, as if he were indulging a child who still believed in fairy tales. I get it when people without access to knowledge turn to faith, he said, shaking his head. But you? He raised an eyebrow, eyes gleaming with a quiet, calculated arrogance. You've traveled the world. You've seen different cultures. I expected better. It was an insult masked as intellectual superiority. Some in the audience let out nervous laughter, uncertain whether to side with the host's boldness or cringe at his audacity. Others sat stiffly, uncomfortable with the way he was pushing. Keanu, however, remained utterly still. He didn't shrink, didn't look away, didn't let the weight of Holloway's words press him down. Instead, he simply studied the man across from him with a quiet, unwavering intensity. Then, at last, he spoke. "Interesting, James," Keanu said, his voice steady, calm, yet carrying an unmistakable strength. "You talk as if faith and intelligence can't coexist." Holloway let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, Keanu. Let's be real. How many wars have been fought over that cross you're wearing? How many people have been persecuted, killed, condemned, because of that symbol?" Keanu ran his thumb over the pendant, his expression unreadable. Then, he met Holloway's gaze. "Are we debating history, James?" he asked, voice measured. "Or are we debating my necklace?" A ripple of reaction swept through the audience. A few murmured, others let out impressed oohs. Holloway's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't used to being put on the defensive. He forced a chuckle, but his fingers tensed ever so slightly on the armrest. "Fair enough," he said, his tone sharper now. "Let's make it simpler. Are you wearing that cross as a statement? A declaration to the world?" It was a setup. A verbal trap. If Keanu said yes, Holloway could accuse him of pushing a religious agenda. If he said no, it would make him seem hypocritical, wearing a symbol he wasn't willing to stand behind. Either way, Holloway thought he had him cornered. But Keanu didn't take the bait. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, considering the host for a moment. Then, with the slightest smirk, he asked, "Are you wearing that expensive watch on your wrist as a statement, James? A declaration to the world?" Silence. A second too long. Then, laughter. The audience erupted, delighted at the effortless reversal. Holloway's jaw tightened for the briefest moment. He was no stranger to tough debates, but this was different. Keanu wasn't reacting with frustration. He wasn't getting defensive. He was turning Holloway's own tactics back on him, calmly, smoothly, and the audience was starting to take notice. But Holloway wasn't about to let control slip through his fingers. He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to sound dangerous. "All right, Keanu. Let's be blunt. In a world of science, evolution, and technology, do you really believe that symbol on your chest still has a place?" The subtle provocations were gone now. This was a direct challenge. The audience held their breath. Keanu's lips parted, ready to respond. And then, the show's theme music cut through the tension. A commercial break. Holloway grinned triumphantly, turning to the camera. "We'll be right back, folks," he announced smoothly. "But trust me, this conversation is far from over." As the show returned, the studio lights shifted subtly, casting a polished glow over the stage. The Voices in Debate logo flickered on the screen. James Holloway adjusted his tie, clasping his hands together, his smug smile firmly in place. He believed he had Keanu right where he wanted him. "And we're back, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man convinced he'd already won. He turned to the camera, making sure to hold his audience. "Before the break, we left an important question in the air. One I think we all want answered." His eyes gleamed as he turned back to Keanu. "In a world of science, technology, and evolution, does that symbol still have a place?" He was waiting for hesitation. Waiting for Keanu to stumble. But Keanu didn't hesitate. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. Calm. Steady. A flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "James," he said, his voice smooth as ever, "if you don't mind, may I ask you a question?" Holloway blinked, momentarily thrown by the shift. Then he recovered, plastering on his usual smug grin. "By all means," he said, his tone laced with amusement, though there was a hint of wariness behind it now. Keanu studied him for a moment, then asked, "What do you believe evolution is?" Holloway squinted slightly, as if trying to pinpoint the trap. "Oh, come on, Keanu. Evolution is progress. It's growth. It's about leaving outdated beliefs behind and advancing toward a world built on reason." Keanu nodded, as if genuinely considering the answer. "So, to you, evolving means abandoning anything that can't be measured in a lab?" Holloway let out a dry chuckle. "Well," he spread his hands, "if something can't be proven, then it's just an idea, right?" Keanu held his gaze. "Patient. Unshaken. And love?" Holloway blinked. Keanu's voice remained steady. "What about love? Can you measure it, James?" A murmur ran through the audience. A few people crossed their arms, intrigued by the unexpected turn. Holloway scoffed, but there was the faintest edge of unease now. "I'm not sure I follow." Keanu didn't let up. "Does love exist?" Holloway exhaled sharply. "Of course it does." Keanu's eyes stayed locked onto him. "But have you ever scientifically proven it? Have you ever held love in your hands? Placed it under a microscope?" Silence. For the first time that night, Holloway hesitated. His expression flickered, just for a second. He realized where Keanu was leading him. Holloway forced a laugh, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh no, no, no. You are not going to compare religion to love." Keanu didn't smile. Didn't flinch. "I'm not comparing them," he said simply. "I'm asking you, if something can't be scientifically proven, does that mean?" The question hung in the air like a blade. The audience held their breath. For the first time, Holloway hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, but long enough. His eyes flickered, momentarily thrown off balance. Keanu, however, remained as steady as ever. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shift in his seat. But when he spoke, his words carried a quiet weight that filled the entire studio. "James," he said evenly, "you talk about faith as if it's a chain, something that binds people, holds them down. But what if, for some, it's a bridge? What if, for me, this cross isn't about control, but about freedom?" Holloway opened his mouth to fire back, but Keanu wasn't done. He pressed on before the host could cut him off. "You mentioned wars. Persecution. Yes, religion has been misused. Twisted by those in power to justify terrible things. But that doesn't erase the fact that, for millions, it has also been a refuge. A light in the darkness." Keanu glanced down at the cross on his chest, running his fingers over it briefly before looking back at Holloway. "I don't wear this as a symbol of superiority or control," he said, voice steady. "I wear it as a reminder." Holloway's lips pressed into a thin line. His jaw tensed. Keanu met his gaze without flinching. "A reminder of humility. Of compassion. A reminder that the world does not revolve around me." Silence. Then Keanu tilted his head slightly, his next words deliberate. "What about you, James?" Holloway frowned. "What about me?" Keanu's tone never wavered. It was soft, but the impact was seismic. "Do you believe in anything greater than yourself?" The room tensed. The audience grew even quieter, leaning in, waiting. The question landed like a punch. Holloway inhaled sharply. Just for a second, his posture stiffened. The cameras caught it. He composed himself quickly, exhaling through his nose. "We're not here to talk about me," he said smoothly, forcing a small smirk. Keanu offered the faintest knowing smile. "Maybe we should be." A shift. Almost imperceptible, but undeniable. For the first time that night, the balance of power had shifted. And Holloway knew it. His eyes darkened slightly. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Because when someone reacts with such hostility toward a symbol, he continued, it usually means there's something about it that unsettles them. Holloway's jaw tightened. For the first time, James Holloway, the man known for controlling every conversation, was on the defensive. And the audience noticed. The studio, once filled with restless energy, now crackled with a different kind of intensity. The audience wasn't just watching a debate anymore. They were witnessing a shift. And Holloway hated it. He took a slow breath, leaning back in his chair, trying to mask his frustration with a casual air. But his eyes, now sharper, colder, betrayed him. He couldn't afford to lose this. "All right, Keanu," Holloway said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. But this time, there was something else in his voice. A hint of venom. A desperation to regain control. "You've spoken eloquently about humility, about compassion, about how this cross represents freedom, not control." He leaned forward now, his stare piercing. "But tell me this, what about all the people who have suffered under that very symbol? What about those who were judged? Condemned? Divided in its name?" His voice lowered, each word deliberate, meant to wound. "You wear that cross on your chest," he said, eyes narrowing, "but do you understand the weight it carries?" The audience inhaled sharply, bracing for the response. Keanu didn't flinch. Didn't shift. Instead, he let out a faint, almost amused exhale. "You talk as if the symbol itself is to blame, James." Holloway's eyes sharpened. "Isn't it?" Keanu ran his fingers over the silver cross again, slow and thoughtful. Then, he met Holloway's gaze with calm certainty. "If one person uses a hammer to build a home," he said, "and another person uses the same hammer to break windows." He let the words settle before finishing. "Is it the hammer's fault? Or the person holding it?" The audience murmured. A few exchanged glances. Some nodded. They were impressed. And Holloway saw it. His expression darkened. "That's a convenient metaphor, Keanu," he said, shaking his head. "But we're talking about reality. About history. Christianity, religion, has been responsible for countless wars, oppression, discrimination. People have suffered in its name." He gestured toward Keanu's chest. "And yet you sit here, wearing that cross like it's just a decoration." Keanu didn't react. Didn't rush to defend himself. Instead, he studied Holloway for a long moment. Then, softly, he asked, "James, do you believe in justice?" Holloway blinked. His brows furrowed slightly. "Of course I do." Keanu nodded, thoughtful. "And yet," he said, "how many injustices have been committed in the name of justice?" The room stirred. Holloway's breath caught, just for a second. "What are you getting at?" he asked, a bit more guarded now. Keanu's voice remained steady. "People have done terrible things in the name of justice. But that doesn't mean justice itself is evil." He let that sink in before continuing. "It means people can corrupt even the purest ideals." Silence. Then. "The same goes for faith." Holloway's jaw tightened. Keanu leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, not forceful, but resolute. If people have used faith as a weapon, he said, that's not a failure of faith. His eyes didn't waver. It's a failure of those people. A hush fell over the studio. The audience let out a collective murmur, soft but heavy, like the low rumble before a storm. Holloway forced a chuckle. It was thin, hollow. So you're saying faith is innocent? That religion bears no responsibility for the damage it's caused? Keanu shook his head. I'm saying faith is like fire. A beat. It can warm a home. Another beat. Or it can burn it down. The room hung on his words. But fire itself, Keanu continued, is neither good nor evil. His voice softened. It depends on how people use it. Another pause. Holloway's fingers curled slightly on the armrest. He could feel it. The tide was turning against him. For the first time all night, he had no sharp rebuttal. No quick retort. Keanu watched him carefully. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, he said. Maybe the real question isn't about what faith has done. A slow inhale. Maybe the real question is. A steady exhale. Why does it bother you so much? A direct hit. The audience stiffened. Holloway's expression flickered. Just for a second. Excuse me, he said, but his voice wasn't as firm as before. Keanu didn't break eye contact. You keep attacking faith, James. But have you ever asked yourself, why? The studio was silent. Not just any silence. A heavy, charged stillness. The kind that settled thick in the air. The kind that suffocated. James Holloway, the man who built his career by dismantling arguments, by reducing guests to contradictions and uncertainties, was on the defensive. And he despised it. He forced a chuckle. Straightened his tie. Leaned back in his chair, trying to create the illusion of control. You're clever, Keanu, he said, his voice even. But his fingers. They were gripping the armrest a little too tightly. Holloway sat in the dimly lit dressing room, his fingers still gripping his phone as if holding on to the last remnants of control. The screen glowed in front of him, an endless cascade of tweets, headlines, and reaction videos dissecting his failure in real time. Holloway destroyed on his own show. Keanu Reeves proves wisdom beats arrogance. A masterclass in grace under fire, Keanu outshines hostile host. His face burned as he scrolled through the brutal commentary. His brand had always been built on dominance, on outmaneuvering guests, catching them off guard, turning their words into weapons against them. But tonight, he had been the one cornered. Not by aggression, not by someone trying to overpower him, but by something far more dangerous, calm, unwavering conviction. His mind replayed Keanu's words over and over. Why does the idea of belief make you so uncomfortable? That moment haunted him. The way the studio had fallen deathly silent. The way the audience had leaned in. The way, for the first time in years, Holloway had felt exposed. He took a sharp breath and set his phone down, his reflection staring back at him from the dark screen. For years, he had convinced himself that he was untouchable, that no one could turn the tables on him. But tonight proved otherwise. And what unsettled him the most? It wasn't just that he had lost the debate. It was that, deep down, a part of him wondered if Keanu had been right. Across the city, Keanu Reeves sat in a quiet corner of his home, sipping tea as he watched the world react. He hadn't gone into that interview intending to change anyone's mind, nor had he expected the conversation to take the turn it did. But he knew, in his heart, that the questions Holloway had thrown at him weren't just for show. There had been something deeper there, something unresolved. He set his cup down and picked up his phone, scrolling through the flood of messages. Some praised him, some criticized him, and some simply thanked him for his perspective. But one message caught his eye. It was short. Direct. I don't know why your words got to me. But they did. J.H. Keanu stared at the initials for a moment, then smiled faintly. He typed a simple response. Conversations have a way of revealing more than we plan. Take care, James. And with that, he put his phone down, closed his eyes, and let the night settle around him.